Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to inform those present that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. Moving on to procedural business. Are any members in attendance today acting as substitutes? I don't see any indications. I have apologies from Councillors Cattell and O'Quinn and from Nora Mazui, but I'm not aware of any substitutes. Declaration of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest in relation to any matters included on the agenda? Thank you. In terms of exclusion of the press and the public, the press and public won't be excluded from the first part of this meeting. If we do need to go into confidential session, I will have to ask anyone from the press or public who is in the council chamber to leave for the duration of the confidential proceedings. I'd now like to begin with my chair's communications. This is a special meeting to look at issues relating to the procurement of a new GP contract for Whitehawk. As members will be aware, there have been lots of concern voiced about the way in which this tender has been conducted from people living in East Brighton, local councillors, community groups, and the MP for Brighton Kemp Town. I've also been contacted by members of the HOSC committee requesting scrutiny of this issue. Reflecting this interest, we have some public questions today. These are very welcome, and I hope that we'll be able to get answers to at least some of the questions posed later in today's meeting. If that's not possible, I will ensure that we continue to explore these issues until all these questions are answered. I've also had representations from councillors who don't sit on this committee, but who do represent Whitehawk and adjoining areas who are keen to take part in today's meeting. I've invited these members to join today's Teams call, and they are welcome to ask questions as guests of the committee. It's clear that there have been problems with this procurement. This is evident from the advisory report of the Independent Patient Choice and Procurement Panel, which is included in the papers for this meeting. I'm keen to learn what went wrong and what can be improved, not just in terms of the formal tender process, but also in terms of community and stakeholder engagement before the tender started. It's important to note that the ICB has commissioned an external review of the procurement process, which is due to report this autumn. This external review is welcome, not least because it may consider matters not considered in the Patient Choice and Procurement Panel report. This is because panels are only able to respond to specific issues raised by bidders and can only focus on potential breaches of NHS procurement rules. To be clear about the decision to consider this item today, we could have delayed scrutiny until this report is published. However, there is so much community concern about this issue that I thought it was essential to meet as soon as possible. The committee can always revisit this matter when the external review has been published. In consequence, I've asked NHS Sussex Integrated Care Board, who are responsible for commissioning local GP services, to attend this special meeting. And I'm grateful that we have the ICB's Chief Executive, Adam Doyle, and Chief Integration and Primary Care Officer, Amy Galea, here today as well as Lola Banyoko, the ICB Deputy Chief Integration and Primary Care Officer. Adam has unavoidable commitments later today and will have to leave the meeting if it runs past 3:30 p.m. But Amy and Lola will be able to stay on if required. There are a couple of potential constraints on our discussion today. Firstly, we need to be mindful that the ICB has commissioned an external review of the procurement and that review is still underway. The ICB representatives will not be able to make any statements or comments in public which they consider could potentially influence or prejudge the review's findings. Secondly, there are significant elements of any tender process that must be treated as confidential because they include commercially sensitive information. including about the providers who have submitted bids. This is a real concern, which is also relevant to the outcome of this much needed procurement. We do have the facility to go into confidential session today, and given the nature of this subject matter, I will keep it under review whether it is necessary to do so. However, because this is an issue of such community concern, I do want to discuss as much as we can in public. This may mean that we have to keep discussion fairly high level and won't be able to dive into the details as much as we would like to. We don't want to come in and out of confidential session, so I'll take as much as I can in public before going into part 2 session if we need to. I think it may be helpful to set out the areas that I think we should be able to cover, at least in part, in public session today. Firstly, the committee will want to inquire as to why the decision was made to go to competitive tender for this contract. Even when everything runs smoothly, competitive tender is an expensive and potentially disruptive process. And we will have questions about the rationale for and the costs involved in this decision. Secondly, we will want to hear what engagement prior to the formal tender process was undertaken with patients, local residents, and community organisations, and whether this was a sufficiently robust process. Thirdly, Whitehawk is not a typical area of our city. There are really high levels of deprivation there, but also a real community spirit and lots of community organisations that play a vital role. The committee will want to know what account was taken by the NHS commissioners of the special nature of Whitehawk and how this was reflected in thinking about the contract. For instance, how was social value factored into the design of the new contract? Fourthly, the Independent Patient Choice and Procurement Panel has already published its review. This is included as Appendix 1 to the committee report. However, we've recently been informed that NHS Sussex has also commissioned an independent review of the tender. We'll have questions about why the second review is required, who is leading it, whether it will consider all the issues identified by the panel review, when it is expected to report, and whether the report will be made public. There is clearly public concern about the way that the formal tender process, and in particular the elevation of bids, was conducted. This is an important area of inquiry. However, there are some real concerns of commercial confidentiality here, and I'm not sure we're likely to get very far in terms of discussing these details in public session and in advance of the NHS Sussex Commission review reported. We may be better advised to wait until the review has concluded, if that means that we can scrutinise issues in public session at a later meeting. Thank you. I'm aware that Geoffrey Bowden from Health Watch has arrived at the meeting today. Geoffrey, welcome. Can I ask, before we commence the rest of this meeting, whether you have any declarations of interest in relation to today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Sure. Good enough, thank you. Yes, I have. And this is an area of focus that Health Watch had in the commissioning. So I don't know whether members want me to remain or leave, but we were asked to assess one aspect of all the bids. We didn't see the other aspects that the commissioners judged the commissioning award on. So we did have one interest only.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and for declaring that interest. I'm now going to move on to the public involvement section of the meeting. We do have 2 public questions before us. I don't have a question either. Okay, Barry hasn't arrived yet. Okay. So we do have 2 questions, as I previously stated. Unfortunately, both the questionnaires have not arrived as yet to the meeting. Therefore, what I will do is take their questions as written and provide a written answer, or invite the ICB to reply to them in due course. Thank you. Moving on to member involvement. I've been contacted by Councillor Joe Williams and Councillor Bridget Fishley, who would like to ask questions at this meeting. And I thought the best thing to do here was to invite both to join the meeting as guests, rather than limit them to a single member involvement question with an answer from myself. The Council's constitution does explicitly allow me to invite members to attend as guests in this manner, and they will be able to ask their questions in due course during the meeting.
Well, can I ask then? Yeah,
Councillor Williams?
Yeah,
please,
are we
please?
asking our questions now or waiting for later?
I would suggest that we wait until we're into questions on the contract before us.
I do have to leave to another meeting, so and it is about something else. So I'm wondering if I was able to answer my question.
I have no particular issue with that. If you have to be at another meeting, please do ask your question now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so my question is concerning some clarification, if that's okay, about whether or not a direct award was offered, and if so, why, was it carried through, or why wasn't it possible to carry through? Because I do believe in these circumstances, this is a high possibility, and given the close connection with the local community and the success with the local community, perhaps a direct offer would have been the best way forward. So would you be able to get me some clarification on that, please?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Williams. When we go into the substantive part of the meeting, I will ask the ICB to reply to that, and I'm sure it will.
I'm sorry, I'm not really sure. So when will that be? When will I hear that?
We will shortly be going into the substantive part of the meeting, and I'll ensure that question's answered first so you can leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. We now move on to the substantive part of the meeting, which is the White Hawk Alternative Provider Medical Services Contract. And today we are joined by Adam Doyle, the CEO of NHS Sussex Integrated Care Board, and also by Amy Galea, the ICB's Chief Integration and Primary Care Officer, and Lola Banjoka, the ICB Deputy Chief Integration and Primary Care Officer. Adam and others, would you like to address the committee? Thank you.
Sorry, Adam, it didn't catch that. It's the right button, but for some reason, if you just press the right-hand button again.
There you go.
Right.
Sorry, Adam, we still can't hear.
Oh no, I think that yours is working now.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. Third time lucky. Hi, I'm Adam Doyle. I'm the Chief Executive of NHS Sussex, and thank you for inviting us here today. What we thought we would do, if that was helpful for the committee, was to outline basically our role in commissioning these services, then the process we went through, and then the frame around the external review. And then I'm very happy to take any questions, but we thought we'd give a bit of a context at the beginning, if that's okay. So colleagues will remember who've been around the Brighton Hove system for some time, that just around 9 years ago, there was quite a lot of fragility in the primary care services in Brighton and Hove. People will recall a number of contracts were given back in a very short period of time. So we currently have 3 APMS contracts in Brighton and Hove. So one, which is the Wellesbourne contract, which we've spoken about, but also the Arch Healthcare contract, which is for our homeless community, and also we have one at Brighton Station too. So that the reason we have the APMS contracts is a feature of, at the time, a number of our primary care organisations, particularly GP practices, handed back their contracts. And that was about 9 years ago. And of course, and for colleagues that I worked for a long time ago, that I came just after that period, once the CCG then was placed in legal directions for a number of governance and financial issues in the organisation. So We have a responsibility as an ICB to ensure we've got value for money, productive and also needs-based services across the whole health and care system. You'll be aware that we are at NHS Sussex, so you have responsibility across the whole of that population to make sure we've got equitable outcomes where possible. And our responsibility is to strategically commission the right health and care services across the system. Within that context, we're also supposed to make sure that we can therefore demonstrate for each of the contracts that we hold a value for money, return on investment, and also for certain contracts, like APMS contracts, we have to take a view on a periodic basis about whether we will re-award that contract, procure it, and therefore get that and take that forward. So for this particular contract, we have been working for quite some time, and I want to begin by saying we recognise the hard work of all of our primary care across Sussex and all of the very, very strong and integrated organisations that we work with. But in this context, we had started the procurement. What I'm going to do is hand over to Amy to explain the rationale behind that, and I'll then do when we were notified by the panel of their findings, my decision to therefore conduct the external review. So, Amy, if you don't mind taking that through, then I'll come back at the end.
Absolutely, thank you, and lovely to see everyone. I'm Amy, the Chief Integration and Primary Care Officer for NHS Sussex. So as Adam says, the APMS contract, which is an alternative primary medical services contract, underpins the delivery of primary medical services in this for this particular area. And it's important to note that this contract has within it what we call the funding for general medical services contracts, which is the national contract that primary care providers operate under. And it also has a deprivation premium to note the needs of the population. That deprivation premium is about £35 on top of what is usually funded through a general medical services contract. So the contract that we are discussing today was let on the 1st of April 2018, and it was a 5-year contract. Since December 2022, as an organisation, we have been considering the most sensible approach for how we continue to deliver services in the area, and indeed whether to re-procure or not. And in April 23, I extended the contract by a year to enable us to develop the procurement strategy for this particular contract. During this time, there was engagement with the provider to understand whether they could deliver a new contract. And the outcome of those discussions was that the current provider didn't feel that they were able to do so within the expected contract envelope. At this time, and following procurement rules, we issued what's called a PIN, which notifies the market of our intention to possibly direct award a service. And at the time, we had feedback from the market and that gave us an indication that there was interest from the market to deliver a contract to that value. With that in mind, and noting that the points that I made around contract value in relation to other parts of Sussex, and just reflecting actually on the point that Adam made right at the start, the fact that we only have 3 types of these contracts across the whole of Sussex, and we have several different pockets of deprivation in our system, we decided to procure this contract through the provider selection regime process. So we undertook this procurement in line with the provider selection regime regulations, and an invitation to tender went live on the 17th of May 2024. Partway through this process, on the 13th of June 2024, we paused the procurement process. And the reason for that is that we needed to clarify the finances that were linked to the contract, because it transpired that there was a discrepancy between the staffing costs and the contract value. So we took some time to work with the incumbent provider, so Wellesbourne Community Interest Company, to understand what was going on. Following clarifications on the finances, I decided to lift the pause on the procurement and progress. And again, this was on the basis that we needed to ensure that we were delivering services with value for money in mind, and also because, and through that process, we notified everyone that was interested in the procurement process that there were additional income streams that were that could be looked at for providers who want to deliver services in the area. And I'll explain that a little bit just because I think it's important for you all to know what that means. So all primary care providers are able to receive additional income if they participate in schemes like the Quality and Outcomes Framework, that is a national incentive scheme that asks primary care to deliver certain targets when it comes to improving hypertension outcomes or indeed other long-term conditions, and they get remunerated for that if they reach the target. We also have a number of locally commissioned services that we commission, which reflect some of the needs of the local populations, and primary care providers can choose whether to participate in those or not. But again, if they do, that provides additional income with which they run their organisation and the services for the population. In March 2025, via a platform that we use, it's a procurement platform called Atomis, the intention to award the procurement was put forward to all people who took part in the procurement process. And the standstill period of 8 working days followed this. On March 20th, we received a letter from Wellesbourne Community Interest Company that challenged the decision around the award, as you all know. And we went into a couple of clarifications with them. So on 2 separate occasions, they put forward representations to us on things that they thought did not go as needed to during the procurement process. We reviewed their questions and put forward our representations back. But at the end of this process, Wellesbourne were still not happy with our responses to their queries. And they decided to put forward their representation to the Patient Choice and Procurement Panel, that is a national panel hosted by NHS England. And that was on the 23rd of June 2025. The outcome of the panel's considerations were shared with us on the 23rd of July, and the following day the report was published for everyone in the public domain to see. I think it's important to note that the panel had a number of findings, and you have the report alongside your documentation today, so I won't go into that. But I think what's worth me highlighting is that the panel's main recommendation to us was to return to an earlier step in the provider selection regime process, which is namely the publication of a new contract notice and issuance of invitation to tender documentation. Put simply, this means that we were asked to stop the current process and to restart it if we so needed to. Of course, the ICB needs to make its own decisions around what to do next following those recommendations. And following this, we decided to vary the contract for Wellesbourne for a further 12 months. And that was done at the end of August. And that was to maintain services, primary medical services to the local population. But also, we decided to undertake an independent review. And at this point, I'll hand over to Adam.
Thank you. So what we decided to do, frankly, I was on leave when the announcement came out from the panel. So I spoke to the team whilst on holiday to say we need to consider what our next step here is and be really transparent about how we do that. So as a chief executive of this organisation, we've procured many things, and I've been here for 9 years. This is the first time this has happened to us. So therefore, as chief executive, you would sit and go, what has happened in regards to that? And for colleagues that are aware, I was on a national secondment for a number of months while this contract was being awarded. So I wasn't here when actually the contract was let and awarded. So I agreed with our audit committee chair that I would therefore commission an external review of this. So the external review will actually look into all of the processes that happened around this. So as chief executive, I'm very clear that we should always be open to scrutiny and challenge and where we may not have got things correct. But the reality of the independent panel, it says quite a lot in it, but it hasn't also looked at the overall process by which this has gone through. And we pride ourselves on being a learning organisation. So if in this process we have got something wrong, we'll be very honest about that. So to answer an earlier question, we will publish the report in full where we possibly can. If there are any parts that are commercially sensitive, of course, we'll follow due process on that. But we're very committed to the report being in the public domain once it's done. It needs to look at everything, and then be really clear about it. Because this happened in July, our most recent board meeting for NHS Sussex was this week, and I published the terms of reference in my chief executive report. So they're they're in the public domain. They're clear how we're going to look at it. They're pretty expansive, because you want to look at the whole process. Because if you're the chief executive, it says currently some elements of the panel that there could have been some issues within the organisation about how it did that. But equally, as part of the process, you would understand I, as chief executive, have had representation from many parties involved in this procurement. So therefore, I have to look at it in an objective, independent way. But frankly, because many parts of my own organisation were involved, that was my decision to therefore get an external review of this to be done rather than us to do it in-house. That will report to the audit committee of the ICB. It's probably also important to recognise the chair of that committee is very new, so wasn't here as part of the overall process either. And we've also agreed that we will share the report with NHS England, who oversee the performance of the ICB as well. So that's the approach that we're aiming to go through. We aim for the purpose and the scope of the review to really look at all activities related to procurement. So the development and approval of the procurement plan, the stakeholder engagement and communication, the preparation and dissemination of the procurement documentation, the tendering, assessment and evaluation process, the decision making through the process, and escalation and issue management and how we responded to concerns during that process. Our take is that should give a full and comprehensive view about what happened to therefore be clear what we do next. It's also important to state that at that point then, NHS Sussex will have to take a view about what it does next with this procurement. And therefore we have to be quite open-minded about what this review will show before we are clear what the next step of the process will look like. So we are happy to answer any questions, but there may be things I do not know the answer to, because I won't know the answer until we've had the external review. And once that's done, we are very happy to come back and speak to you again as a committee. So I hope, Chair, that gives a kind of a high level sort of history of what's happened from our perspective and what we're aiming to do to get to the bottom of it once and for all.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Amy, and thank you for coming to give that report back to us. I will now open the meeting to questions from members. I'm aware that there was an indication earlier from Councillor Williams, who I'm not sure if she is still online with us. Councillor Williams, would you like to just repeat your question? Because I know we have to leave the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, I shall repeat the question. So thank you so much for being here today. So I understand in these circumstances, a direct offer is possible. And I wondered about clarification of whether that took place and if it did, what happened and why wasn't it successful? And I would say, you know, for a direct offer to take place, I think it would be very suitable in this situation, given their long-term commitment to the local community and how deeply involved and ingrained they are in our local communities. I think it would have been quite an appropriate path to take. So I would really, if you can give me some clarification on that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So yes, you're absolutely right. A direct award in these cases is possible, and that was explored. So way back in December 22, when we first as an organisation started to think through what would happen next with this contract, that was one of the options that we were exploring. But as I say, there were several conversations with the provider at the time, whilst we also just checking the dates, so you have this this clearly located. So in August 23, we issued a PIN that was going to be our proposed approach to the market. And as part of that, we received interest from the market in relation to this type of contract to the value that we would go out to the market with. So that feedback, alongside with conversations with the provider, that probably I can't outline in full detail here because that wouldn't be appropriate. Those considerations led us to the fact that we should develop a procurement strategy that would go out to market for this particular contract. And the main reason for that was to ensure that we were delivering value for money for the population. I think you will all recognise that we have a responsibility as an organisation to make sure that all of the expenditure in relation to primary care services delivers the best value for the public purse, and that is why the decision was made.
Okay, could I respond to that? Would that be okay?
You have another question, Councillor Williams, that's
Well,
fine.
it's yes, if that's right. So thank you. So there was a direct offer that was contemplated, shall we say. I know you can't give me the details, and that's absolutely fine. So given that this procurement process has now been revisited, and we are examining the whole of that process again, aren't we? So I understand. Would it not be possible to revisit the possibility of a direct offer in this situation?
So I can answer that one, thank you. So as part of the external review, I think the first bullet point I tend to be looking at the development and the approval of that plan. So the circumstances around those discussions, and what I want to be really clear about was with the team, were they true and fair, and was that an appropriate way that we would follow our procurement rules as an organisation. As Amy has outlined, we have a responsibility to procure in line with the provider selection regime and in line with best practice. So we want to assess that. I don't want to preempt the outcome of the review, but there are many options by which could happen next, if that makes sense, once we see what the review says. Everything from a direct award to a re-procurement. And I won't be very open until I've seen the feedback from the report. I can't really be clear what the next recommendation looks like to therefore get that piece right. But yes, there is still the facility to do that. But of course, it would need to be in line with all the relevant rules and all the relevant sort of statutory requirements for the organisation.
Well, thank you so much. That's made it much clearer for me. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll take questions now from Councillor Evans.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Please bear with me. I've got a few questions, but some that have come up while you've been speaking. Thank you for all of that information. But can I start by prefacing what I'm going to ask by saying that just over 2 years ago, I was invited by yourselves to an event at the Amex Stadium, which I think was the first of a series of large-scale engagement sessions that was to talk to local stakeholders about the setting up of the new integrated community teams across Brighton and Hove, but also across the NHS and Sussex more widely. I think I was the only councillor who attended, probably just because it was quite soon after the citywide local elections. So lots of new councillors wouldn't have been aware what committees they were going to be on and all that kind of thing, whereas I was already kind of involved with HOSC and all the rest of it. So, but the event was well attended by other groups and the presentations were very impressive. And you talked about, and I'm quoting directly here now from various bits of the presentations, you talked about ICTs bringing joined up communities working in partnership, local strategies to improve people's well-being and reduce inequalities in health, bringing together an integrated multi-skilled workforce within the community and harnessing the power of local populations to empower local people to be active participants in their own care and maintain independence and control, amongst many other fine intention. So that was in kind of, May, I think, and even more impressive, one local GP provider company were held up as the absolute exemplar of all these fine aspirations of what fantastic community primary care could be. And for those who haven't worked out where I'm going with this yet, that GP practice was in one of our most deprived and least healthy parts of the city, an area beset by previous problems, as Adam just covers in a bit of detail with primary care provision, but slowly building trust with the NHS again, thanks to this provider, which was called the Wellsbourne. So fast forward barely 6 months from that event, and here I'm getting a bit confused about dates because I think Amy just said that you issued a pin in August of 2023, which would only have been barely 2 months later. But every other document I've seen, including the independent panel report, says December 2023. But anyway, some months later, either a couple of months or 6 months later, you were issuing a competitive tender for that contract. And not much more than 12 months after that, we were hearing that the winner in that process was not this exemplar of good community primary care, but a for-profit provider from out of area, allegedly with a less than stellar track record. And I mean, you've mentioned value for money a couple of times, and I get that that's your responsibility, but how anyone could look at, the contract is for a fixed amount, right? It's that they're all bidding for the same contract. It's not about who undercuts each other. They're all bidding for the same contract. And it's about, and in a contract like this, I would have thought most of the money goes to wages and building costs, essentially, because there isn't anything else to pay for particularly. And how anyone could look at a not-for-profit provider and a for-profit provider and think that they could both provide the same level of service when one has to build profit into their sums and the other doesn't have to build profit into their sums seems extraordinary to me. So I don't think that you can possibly hold up value for money as a reason not to go with the community interest provider, but hey. But so anyway, that leads me to all kinds of questions, not least how you got from lionising this amazing provider in 2023 to putting the contract out for tender and then deciding so soon afterwards that they weren't all that great after all and that there were much better for-profit providers around. And also, I'm quite interested in the idea that I think Amy just said that they didn't feel that while the idea of a direct award was explored, they didn't feel that they could provide within that financial envelope. Well, I don't know the people from the Wellesbourne, but if they didn't feel they could provide the service within that envelope, why did they then join in the procurement? I mean, why were they upset when they didn't win the bid? It doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm confused about that as well. And I don't understand how you got from May 2023 to whether it was August or December 2023 and issuing a PIN at all, to be honest. But yeah, so I guess those are my most important questions, is just how did you get from there to there? And I'm sure I've got other questions, but no, okay, I'll leave it there for now. I'm just, yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me this time? Yeah, right. So thank you for your question. So first of all, let's start at the beginning. So ICTs, we are very proud across Sussex for our 13. That is a joint strategy between us and our 3 local authorities, including your own. And I think we're very clear about the work we're doing together. And I think if we look at all of the areas we're working on, we're seeing nationally to be driving that forward very well. So I think let's recognise that aspiration is well seen, and there is many evidential things where organisations are working differently to therefore drive that forward. So I think let's sort of start there. In terms of then the question asked about the PIN. So this is the bit that I'm seeking clarification on, but it is my understanding at this point, to be confirmed by the external review, that a PIN had to be put out, because to do the direct award, that would have to be the case. So in that conversation then, it is my understanding, to be confirmed by the external review, that there was a difference of view about price. If you want to ask why a provider has come forward for the procurement, we are the wrong people to ask that question of, to be frank. And therefore that is for all the bidders to answer as to why they thought they could respond to the contract price. In terms of as I said at the beginning, there are many providers across the system who are doing great things. Wellesbourne has been one of them. I'm very clear on that. Equally, the organisation, because of the nature of the APMS contract, has to review that under the legal framework for how we do that. So our process has to be now, let's get to the bottom of all of this and then be clear how we go forward. I don't see it so much in we were saying that they were brilliant and then suddenly have said they're not. I think there was a lot of great work that the team were doing in Wellesbourne, but then the reality was we had to be clear about how we manage the contract. As Amy has covered, she'd already extended it for a year. There would not have been much basis by us being able to do that again without a clear procurement strategy. We could then have to have done the direct award, but then we had an issue about VFM. So then the question was, okay, well, how do we procure it? And of course then, which we can't say in public because it is commercially sensitive, but we had bidders that said they could deliver for that contract price. So therefore, then we had to then go into the process. So, but I think your challenge about why not the direct award at the beginning, which was the other council's question, will be part of what the review looks at, so we can be clear about why and why not.
Thank you for those answers. That does clear up my confusion about the PIN, certainly. And I mean, for what it's worth, I think that we should also be lobbying as a committee and as councillors for it not to be the case that you know, because the other type of GP contract, the partnership contracts, of course, they are theirs for life until they choose to retire or sell their businesses or until the CQC says they're doing an absolutely rotten job and tells them they can't provide it anymore. But they're basically long-term contracts forever until something, you know, till they choose not to, kind of thing. And I think that especially not-for-profit providers should also be able to get contracts like that. But thank you for the answers.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I have got an indication from Councillor De Oliveira.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming and answer our questions. Well, I think you mentioned about, well, the independent review seems to be clear that perhaps some breach has been on the procurement there when it comes to the tender. And the colleague has mentioned the review that you have commissioned. However, can you provide here and now the exact steps that you're going to be overseeing in terms of responsibility, timeline, which kind of outcomes in terms of who's going to be looking over this overview, and that's going to be made public? And will the ICB then ensure that those breaches cannot happen in future procurement process? So we can, again, make sure that trust in local health governance can be rebuilt. And another question that I would like to add there, if I may, is that, you know, given that mentioned that I think Whitehall is one of the most deprived areas of Brighton Hove, and, you know, with entrenched health inequalities, I'd like to perhaps ask how you see in your role, how the ICB ensure that any future procurement processing embedded on the voices, and it's really important to stress here, the voices of patient, staff, and community organizations from the outset, rather than treating a local residents as an afterthought. Was the contract framework has already been designed? So can we see something that's going to be available in terms of the minutes or written records of how the decision-making process was made? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll do the beginning part, and Amy will do the engagement element, if that's okay. So the first bit, so this is going to sound quite glib. We're currently in a standstill with the provider who's going to do the external review. So therefore, we're following due process regarding that. We should be able to announce who that provider is next week. That we would then expect that to take between 10 to 12 weeks. That is longer than I would like, but actually we want to make sure it's done right and appropriately and done well, if that makes sense, to go through all the areas that I covered off. In that context, though, it's really important that we're clear what is the learning for the organisation. One of your questions was what does that look like for the organisation? So we think 10 to 12 weeks is the time frame that I've been given. That would then you could imagine then it would need to go through the relevant committees of the organisation, and then would then go on to the board and be published in that time frame. So I'd be saying I think early in 2026 is when we'll be in the public domain about what's happened going forward. The reason I'm quite more close to that, until the work starts happening, I've been clear with the provider. I do expect them to whatever they find to go further into that, to get behind that. So, but they've assured me that 12 weeks should be doable, but I just want to caveat that in case it takes longer because of the things they find out in the process. In terms of the learning and recommendations, I said at the beginning, this is the first time it's happened to us in my history here. So it is a surprise and concerning to me in equal measure. So therefore, I want to be clear: if there are areas of non-compliance or areas that we need to improve our approach, or opportunities to amend policies, procedures, or whether there's anything about staff training, education, that we know about that. And I'm being open about that, depending on, actually, there is another scenario where the review happens and it says, most of this you did correctly. So it's trying to get that and understand what it means and looks like. So I think 2026, early in that year, I think when we can then talk about it and where we got to. In terms of the engagement for it, there will be mixed views about that. But Amy, do you want to talk through the process that was followed in terms of engaging with the community and relevant stakeholders as part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was engagement with the local community, and I'll just go through the forms of that. I think it's important for me to clarify, though, that the engagement with the local community was around their experience of services. So we wanted to understand how they're experiencing services and glean any feedback from them about areas that we should be thinking about in terms of areas to improve. The survey was open to anyone who is in receipt of primary medical services in the area, because it's important to note that not everyone will be registered with the particular practice. But we wanted to get the views of the community, because we know that people register with different practices at different points in time. So this took form in the form of a survey between the 19th of February and the 29th of February 2024. That link was shared extensively on social media, and it focused particularly on Facebook, Twitter, and Nextdoor groups linked to the White Hawk population, and had a total reach of about 610 people. There were posters as well with the QR codes to the survey distributed across 8 sites across White Hawk. Following feedback from the survey, we set up some community group meetings. There were 4 in total, to both encourage completion of the survey, but also for us to have specific conversations with groups of people who wanted to engage in a non-digital format. There were 56 responses to the survey received, and we also added further insight from community partners such as Health Watch in Brighton and Hove about feedback from the local community about their experiences of different services in the area. So that was the process that we used as part of this procurement process, which is commensurate with how we would do other procurement processes.
That's great. Now, thank you. In terms of the first answer, so you're going to provide us, and I think you gave yourself a deadline for early next 2026. That's correct. For us to come back here, you're going to provide us with that information. I think it's clear for the record. And then just to follow to your colleague, is that you mentioned in terms of accessibility that you went social media, but a lot of people will not be on social media. A lot of people will not even have the digital literacy for that. So are we excluding, and that's really important, because you want to learn the lessons, you say it's the first time. I don't know what it means, because that's the first time that we know about it. However, can you guarantee that those kind of blind spots will not happen? Will we have people in the community who are excluded from the process? Can you give us this assurance? That's my point coming back to you here. And I'd like just to finalize, to echo what Councillor Evans said about, it being awarded to not to a non-profit organization in terms of being what for-profit organization. I think my lesson from there is really in terms of what kind of safeguards in place to make sure the finance providers who are tendering are not privileged over the community organizations who are there to provide a good local service. Because at the end of the day, who is the most impacted, I would like to come back to it, and that's what should be the center of our discussion, are those residents in one most deprived areas of our city who will be at the detriment of it. It's not us here, it will be them.
So I'll come back on the first element to show for the avoidance of doubt. Let me just be really clear of the next steps of the process. 12-week review, goes to the audit committee, the NHS Sussex board. Then, as I'm committed to, very happy to come back to HOS to go through that. So that'll be the time frame by how we do that. I'm just giving the caveat on the 12 weeks just in case the review takes longer for those things. So very happy to have it on the public record. Just to come back slightly, if I can though, as the chief executive of the NHS here for 9 years, it may be what you know, but as the accountable officer, this is the first time it has happened to the commissioning organisation that I've been responsible for in my time here. So therefore, it is making me ask questions about the process going forward. So therefore, be clear about that. Then, in terms of the wider work, in terms of how we therefore take this forward, there's definitely, clearly we're hearing quite a lot of feedback from the community about this. So one of my very clear key lines of inquiry is, how would you do that better? Because in reality, there is, you covered it at the beginning, Chair, there are polarised views of this, if that makes sense, playing out. And of course, there's been representation from one of the bidders to this panel process. But also, I have other bidders as part of this to also consider as well. So I think our strategy would be, first of all, how did we get here? And also, what are the lessons learned for engagement? Now, when people say to you, how good are you at that? I always say to my team, we can always be better at that. There's always more that you can do. However, when I look at, at us compared to other ICBs, up until this point, I thought we did it relatively well, but something hasn't gone right here. So the review is the best way of working that through. And until I've done that, I can't really come back with what are the specific lessons learned. I think, though, our history of allocating resources via an APMS contract to 3 deprived communities in the city that I've led the health system for 9 years, I think on our record does prove we have historically differentially funded people who've got less. And I therefore think that shows our commitment to deprived communities. However, there's always more that we can do.
Shall I just come back on the engagement piece as well? Because I think that's why we held the 4 community groups, because we understand some of the issues around digital inclusion. So we held those 4 groups purposely to explore some of the experience of people in a bit more detail, and that included an advocacy group with people with learning disabilities and autism, a social living room, and 2 groups of people over the age of 50. So we tried our best to both look at digital means but also in-person opportunities through which to gather feedback. And what I would say is that as an organisation, we tend to collect feedback with the help of Healthwatch from our local populations on a routine basis. So it's also in conjunction with the feedback that we already have from the community, because these things shouldn't be done on a one-off procurement with a procurement reason in mind. We have a rapport with the local community too that is really important to us.
Thank you, Amy and Adam. Can I just check if Councillor Fishley is still with us online?
Yes, I am. Hang on a sec. Hi.
Hi, Bridget. I'm happy for you to ask your questions.
Thank you. This is a question from a resident in the area I represent, which is outside the White Hawk ward. They want to know, given the outpouring of love for the Wellesbourne, you said that the procurement process is going to continue, but do you have any ability to just stop it and just continue with the existing provider?
So the current procurement has been ceased in terms of the model going forward. We then got to do the review. So as Amy said, we have extended the contract with the current provider for the next year. We would need to satisfy ourselves that all of the best practice in line with the provider selection regime measures were made, including quality, experience and value for money, to therefore agree to directly award it. And I think we've got a piece of work to do once the review is in, to therefore assess the options we've got available for how we take it forward. And as I said earlier, that is an option, but so is procuring it. And until I've seen the external review, we need to take a deal with that at that point.
Okay, thank you. Can I just make one observation about the consultations that you just talked about? Have you done similar consultations for the other providers that have bid for this? because we'd like to know how their patients feel about them.
So in terms of the commercial sensitivity of any procurement, at this current point, we're saying that for the ICB to have awarded it to the provider it has awarded it to, it felt assured in the process that it went through for the quality and effectiveness of the providers. The review will therefore show to us what actually that assessment looked like, and what the information that the scoring panel looked at, therefore assess that and be clear that this was the right provider. So we're not able to answer that question at the moment until we've had their review.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fishley. Now turn to Jeffrey.
My question actually has been answered in a way, because many of the direct questions that have been put to you have been delayed coming back because of the outcome of the review. You've now given a clear indication you expect it to be delivered in 12 weeks, give or take, we hope. So many of those issues may well be answered, but I didn't get time to clarify our role due to my late arrival, another diary malfunction. I apologise. But, part of our role while we still exist is, and accountable to local authority, is promoting and supporting the involvement of local people in commissioning the provision of scrutiny of local care services. So our role in representing people as part of this procurement for the White Hawk service was entirely justified in our view. But as I said, in the end, we were asked to assess of the 5 bidders one area. So we didn't see, and there were 20 areas which the bids were assessed on. So we have no knowledge of what others responded. So we just assess one narrow area, mainly to do with patient involvement and communication. But we look forward to seeing the response of the review, because whether Health Watch will be around to help you again is another matter, which is another question altogether. Maybe we'll learn something at the party conference when the Secretary of State speaks, but I digress. I'm not feeling sore about anything.
Is it worth maybe just the point you make around the assessing one part of the questions, just so that for everyone's awareness, that is part of the process we adopted for the entire review panel. So there are a set of questions, and each question was linked to a particular set of reviewers with expertise in those areas. They review the answers and set the score. So I guess one of the things that the independent review that Adam outlined will look at is whether that process is followed appropriately and whether that gives the best outcome for the organisation and indeed the population.
Councillor Hogan.
Thank you, and thanks for coming and answering the questions. My question is quite simple. Who is carrying out the external independent review?
So I can announce you that it is due to procurement rules. It's in a standstill process before we can announce that it is. But I'll make it very clear in the next week in a communication to the committee. Yes.
Yeah, I'm quite disappointed to find out that the review process hasn't started, because speaking as somebody who's been stupid twice so far in my career, it's a very unsettling time when procurement is being considered, not only for the patients, but for the staff as well. So it's quite disappointing to see that this is being pushed down the road yet more, because we were led to believe that this report would be coming back in autumn of this year. Thanks.
So that's helpful, and I'm not sure how you were led to believe it was autumn because the board did make the decision to do it in that time frame. But if there's a miscommunication, then I will apologise on our behalf for that. Yes, I recognise that. I'd also say, however, there is due process to be followed. So as you will be aware as in your own organisation, if you just go through the timeline, just to be clear, 23rd of July was when we were notified. 24th, it then went public. There was some processes through August to therefore review how we would handle that, recognising that also required the decision to pause and end the procurement. There were a number of organisations involved in that, and therefore getting the right due diligence around the right approach to take, and also being really clear that getting the terms of reference approved both by my board and also by Energies England has meant that I think that should hopefully give you a sense of rigour and independence to it. But unfortunately, yeah, it will take that length of time to do the review justice. What I'm very committed to doing is coming back with the review. But what I don't want to do is not get it right, and therefore we'd never really put this issue into a fair process moving forward. So I think I recognise we'd all want it to be done really fast. I recognise that for everybody involved, the providers, and I mean that in the broadest sense, who bidded for this, and the incumbent, but also I'm doing a review of process internally. So I have my own organisation that are also, worried about what it might say about what they have done too. So I want it done as quickly as possible, but we have to follow the right process to get it right.
Councillor Hill.
Did somebody want to come back on that specific point? Because I've got a separate question. No? Okay.
It's linked. Yeah. No, thanks. I do appreciate you mentioned you were away for 9 months and you got back here and then you're here answering questions. I really appreciate that. I need to ask the questions though. And I'd like to thank you for recognizing that due process needs to take place. I think we want to hear this. Based on that, could be added to perhaps the appendix of your report, the minutes of meetings and the written record of decisions made in the process, so we all can see and scrutinize it.
So I'll commit to take that back. There will be elements. It is a legal process. So you as an organisation also award contracts regularly. So having all of that in the public domain at times can be commercially sensitive. So what I will do, if that's okay, I'll take the action back to what we can put into the public domain in terms of legal privilege, and we'll come back to you with a position on that. So what we can share, we will. But of course, I want to make it really clear that there are certain things in these processes, as you are aware, that I can't share because they are commercially sensitive.
What can be available in terms of meeting decisions, the process will be made available on the report and you can have a look at it.
I will commit to therefore getting into the report the relevant information that we feel can be put in the public domain that gives confidence about the process that was taken, and also what I'm very aware of, where having worked in the system a long time, will be the report says this thing. What is the evidence that proves those assumptions are correct, if that makes sense? So I'm very clear about it being as transparent and open as possible.
Thank you. I wanted to just ask firstly, you mentioned in the start of the meeting that you were on holiday when certain things happened, if I understand correctly, if I'm right, in 2 separate periods. I'm just wondering if that had any tangible effect on the decision making or any sort of stream of responsibility in any way.
No, so there's 2 areas of my leave. So I was away on the back of a medical issue and also want to comment at the beginning of the year. The reason why we agreed that I could commission the review is that when the award was given, I wasn't within the organisation, so therefore I wasn't privy to any discussions that said it goes this way or that way, and I wasn't in any of the assurance committees that signed it off, so there's an independence to that. That's the first bit. And no, I was on holiday when the report came out, so therefore the team called me to tell me, and then when I came back, we then started to work through what the process would look like.
Okay, but so it doesn't really affect it, and I think, yeah, okay. So I also wanted to ask about the claim by Wellesbourne around the public engagement. Their claim was that the EHRC hadn't engaged with targeted groups. You've claimed that they have. So I'm interested in the reasoning for that disparity in perspective, if you could respond to their points that are in the report.
I don't think I can respond for Wellesbourne. I simply set out the processes that we undertook. a lot has been said in this process, in public, also at points in which maybe we shouldn't have heard much about this process, because in procurement periods, there are processes around standstill that need to be respected by providers in such a process. So I think there is a lot that needs to be looked at in relation to how this process unfolded. But I can only talk about what we did, and that's what I set out today.
Thanks. The other question I've got, or other two, I've got a question which is about the intranet, because there's a mention about not all providers having access to the information that's in there regarding estimates about the revenue. So could you respond? It's on page 41, the relevant point in the report.
So I think from memory, this refers to the fact that as part of when we paused this process, because there were questions around the staffing costs and how they relate to the contract value, we identified that it would be helpful for providers to know that clearly they can seek additional sources of income through locally commissioned services and also the quality and outcomes framework that I referenced. However, I think what I would say is it is important to recognise that a contract needs to be able to stand on its own 2 feet, if you like. And so a provider that is taking on such a contract needs to be confident that they are able to deliver the services and the specification required within that contract value. And I think there are references in the independent panel report that perhaps that wasn't clear in terms of additional revenue streams that could be brought into the organisation, but those are all optional and additional and not part of the core contract value.
Thanks. So my final question is regarding question ITT02. And so the panel found that there were issues with that question and that it breached regulation 4 regarding transparency and fairness. So the question is around how do you plan to communicate with patients in the first year of the service? And I think it gave a 1 score limited to Wellesbourne in their reply. And there's an argument around the fact that it's a pre-existing service. There is criticism made about the bidder, that is Wellesbourne, not giving enough required detail around that. But naturally, if it's a reoccurring service, it's not necessarily going to have to do the same engagement exercises as something that is, a new service as such. So I'm wondering what the sort of, is that standard practice, a question like that, and why that 1 score was given? Would you, in the sort of, previous exercises have expected that kind of score? It'd be good to understand more regarding that.
So anyone who engages in the procurement process needs to answer the questions that are set out. So that's standard for all providers, whether you are the incumbent or not. And the area that you highlight is an area that the review will take a view on. I think that's all within the scope of the independent review.
Okay, yes, it is, but also there would be a practice and procedure. Like, this isn't the first time this has happened in terms of a questionnaire, and if that's something that, I appreciate this will get reviewed, but also, is this typical for your own experience of how both the question is phrased and how it is marked? Is it possible for you to take a view on that, or would you only feel able to take a view after the external review?
So we feel we followed the process as we usually would as an organisation. Clearly, the independent panel has cast a question around that, and that will be looked into.
Okay, I guess I just think that giving a 1, it is going to have a different level of information. So it seems quite intuitive to me that there's an issue, but anyway, I think I'll leave those comments there.
Thank you. I won't take long this time. Sorry, everyone. I did forget a couple of things that I wanted to ask, but also, again, they're informed by some of the answers you've given. I just wanted to touch on what Amy said about giving the different bits of the procurement to different kinds of experts to kind of mark them, which is, I accept that that's a way that you try and ensure that the process is fair, and that's kind of commonplace in procurement and all the rest of it. But you must be aware, you know, everyone is aware, surely everyone who has anything to do with procurement, that there are that the ability to produce great pitch documents is not at all connected to the ability to produce great healthcare, and that there are, in every line of work, not just in healthcare, there are firms that have whole, you know, bigger firms that have whole departments who just concentrate on producing great pitch documents, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they will produce great service of any kind whatsoever. It just means they produce great pitch documents, and the NHS is littered with previous cases where somebody's produced a great pitch document, being given the contract, and then produce an absolutely lousy service. So there's that, and that plays into one of my other questions, which I meant to ask earlier, which is around the social value weighting in the procurement. Now, you might not be able to go into any detail on how the procurement was designed, because presumably that's part of your review, and that wasn't something that the NHS independent panel said anything about, because they didn't feel that it was in their remit to say anything about it, and you hadn't breached any rules on that. Unlike in other ways, but nevertheless, it was set at the legal minimum. And I would have thought that in an area like Whitehawk, knowing what we know about how some companies, some bigger companies, produce great pitch documents but not great service, that you would set social value at the absolute maximum to make sure that you are providing that very deprived area with a good service rather than with a great pitch document. And I just wondered if you had any view on the fact, given that you weren't involved, Adam, for starters, you know, whether you had any view on the fact that the social value was set so low at the legal minimum. And I also just wanted to check, I'm glad to hear about the patient engagement groups, but before the procurement went ahead, but 56 responses. I understand that the patient list at the Wellesbourne is about 8,500. So 56 is well under 1%, I make that, which is not much of a public engagement. Thank you.
So I'll get that one out, if that's okay. So you say social value first of all. So, well, the scoring was broken down into sort of 25% for quality innovation, 10% for value, 25% for integration and collaboration to service sustainability, 30% for improving access, reducing health inequalities, facilitating choice, and 10% for social value. So it's how you look at the whole thing in the round, if that makes sense. So when we're describing the requirements for health inequalities for that area, that 10% would be kind of standard for these contracts, and comparing against other comparable sectors, including the city councils, 10% policy too, it feels to me to be roughly in line with where you would expect. But it's a fair question I've asked for this particular contract. Was the rationale and rating the same in terms of that context? So that's kind of the approach we've taken. And I suppose social value is important, but so is delivering timely access, so is responding to health inequalities, and that roughly still feels to me intuitively the right breakdown for this. But of course, the independent review that will come will give us a bit of a sense of that. But you asked directly the questions, Councillor Evans, so I thought I'd give you a direct answer.
Councillor De Oliveira.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think we are talking, and one thing that keeps in all our minds, I'm sure it keeps in mind the colleagues, is the community. It's the residents, isn't it? That's why we're here. We really want to apologise to the community, as we still may lose Westbourne in the process.
So my commitment will be to do an open and transparent review. Where there are lessons to be learned, where we've made an error, I'll be very public about what they are, and therefore I'll make the apology at that point should there needs to be one. Most important thing is we've secured ongoing services for that community at this current point, and there has been no non-continuity of this. The reason that I think to the earlier question from Councillor Hogan that I want to be really clear about is we need to be quick now, because in reality, whatever happens next, the continuity has to be there going forward. And that's my main commitment to therefore getting it done. But also, I know there was a bit of a challenge from the committee about pace and getting it done. Recognising the level of interest and difference of opinion with this is why I want to make sure that the review is really robust. So therefore, what we do next is kind of irrefutable and clear about how we take that forward.
If I understood that the review in itself, I think is a policy of the community to the point to say, I'm going to look at that, I recognize something went wrong, and we're looking at it. Is that?
It's my commitment to do a review, but to the community, my job is to make sure, so I've got responsibility to 1.7 million people for healthcare across Sussex. So my commitment is to be fair and transparent and to be open where we've got things wrong at this current point, whilst I've got a review panel looking at an element of the process that was built from a representation of one of the bidders. I've got a responsibility to make sure we do a robust review, and therefore where there is any issue that we have made an error, I'll be very happy to make an apology about that.
Councillor Parrott.
Hello, thank you for coming today. I guess my observation, and I've not been a councillor for very long, and this is, I've not sat through anything like this, and I wasn't really around when this was all happening. But my observations today would be around something that I find deeply disturbing, actually, which is around the mismatch of cultures which are happening. I'm hearing of a well-run practice that fits very neatly and very tightly and is really performing against the new 10-year NHS plan, which has just been published. And we've got something that was really beginning to perform, really beginning to work, providing integrated neighbourhood care, providing workforce reform, providing proactive population health in an area that's significantly deprived. And yet somehow we've gone into a culture of procurement, and as Councillor Evans pointed out, and I think it's a really valid point, to a CIC who aren't going to be probably the best at producing long, lengthy documents that pitch and that meet criteria in a way that, meets criteria as opposed to delivering. So I'm really struggling to put these two things together. I feel really disappointed, and I feel really, really disappointed that we've considered that the engagement process with community was considered enough. I'd go back to the 56 respondents and say that, frankly, I don't think that is good enough. And I think that, we need to work harder and better to be co-producing some of this stuff with our actual community that we're trying to deliver this to. So I'm genuinely very disappointed to hear this today, and I feel really nervous about how this review is going to play out and whether the lessons of engagement and whether this should even have happened in the first place. Because when we've got something that's really working and working well, I'm concerned about why money was put aside for a procurement process, why we've put an organisation through something like this when they're working well. Now, if at that point, when the direct process was looked at and it was felt that they couldn't deliver, I'm curious about what happened and what conversations were had then about how well they could come into a process where they could carry on. I think it was Councillor Hogan who said about, staff morale. What is happening now? We've now got a community that have got a health service that probably isn't delivering as well for them. And I feel for them. I really feel for them. I feel for the community. And I actually also really feel for the staff at Wellesbourne who have been thrown under a bus somewhere, or that's how it must feel to them.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. Councillor Hill.
I actually just wanted to ask, as I think you need to go quite soon, Adam, if you wanted to reply at all to the two public questions. I know there's going to be a written response, but I just wondered if you had anything to add orally before you leave.
So I haven't been sent the public questions. I'm happy to answer them if you can.
That's fine, Adam. As I indicated earlier in the meeting, I will send those questions on to you, and then you can reply in due course. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Hill.
I think that was essentially the question. I mean, Yeah, I think without reading them, I mean, there's a question from a 70-year-old veteran who says he's been extremely happy with the current service and he's outraged at the procurement process. Trying to summarise here quickly, but essentially he feels that the procurement was deeply flawed, and they've had problems with GP provision in the past in Whitehawk, and they're really disappointed about having this for-profit provider, essentially. So, I mean, that's sort of the broad summary, and then the other question is essentially.
I just interject.
Yeah,
just to say these both in the addendum
yes,
attached to the paper, so they are publicly available to look at. But I will ensure that they get passed on to you, Adam. Okay, I have Councillor Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for attending. I want to talk about public engagement. I think it's something that, you know, I can get my teeth into. There's a lot around this that's, you know, a bit difficult to understand, but I think I can understand this. So clearly, you know, I think we're all not impressed with 56 responses. I think that's been said, but I want to know, so how you tried to reach people. Some communities are harder to reach than others. Communities experiencing greater deprivation are traditionally harder to reach. So I want to know how you tried to reach those people. Did you use local groups who are already embedded in the community to try to reach them? Did you use the actual practice to try to reach their patients? Because I imagine they've got a lot more than 56. And I also want to know about how any results from public engagement feed into any scoring or any assessment in terms of procurement. And if it does feed into anything, any decision making about procurement, I'm interested to know how you compare that with the other bidders who aren't there, right? So this is one provider who's been there for a long period of time, and we all know that often feedback, people who choose to offer feedback are often offering negative feedback. They're driven to do so because they, because they've got a problem, because they experience an issue. I do occasionally, but very rarely get emails from members of the public who want to congratulate me on something that's fantastic in the local area. They usually got a problem, right? And so we kind of know that. So it may be that any responses are skewed towards the negative. I don't know what the responses were, but that's a possibility, and we kind of need to understand that in our assessment. But if it does feed into any kind of assessment for procurement purposes, how are you then conducting that exercise with the other providers who aren't there? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a really good one. So in terms of whether it feeds into the review of the procurement process itself, the answer is no. In that, what the engagement does is it helps inform the specification of the service. So that's why it was focused on the experience of the current service offer in relation to primary care services, so that it helps us refine the specification. And it did have a focus on how we could reduce health inequalities in the area. I think you're absolutely right to highlight, I guess, the low engagement with the survey, but that's why then we did the community groups, and those 4 sessions were done in the way that they were.
Could I ask another question? Thank you. So can I ask how many people you had in those meetings? Because we know that you've got 56 digital responses. So how many people came to the engaged with the meetings? Do you know? Sorry.
I don't have the figure with me today, but I can definitely come back on that to give you an accurate representation of the number of people who attended each session.
Thank you. And I also asked, did you use local groups to push out your survey, or to kind of try to reach those harder harder to reach areas of the community.
So yes, we did use local groups and local engagement, but I think what I'm taking away from today is that it would be helpful to possibly share further information about how that engagement process happened, which we can do.
And just if I can, as part of the review process, when I cover the 6 pillars of it, one was the engagement with the community. So to be really clear, what was that actually? Was that appropriate? What should there be more done? And was it in line with expected best practice to therefore get that piece right? Which is why I said at the beginning, we will always say we could always do more, but part of my assessment needs to be, was it reasonable? Was it not, for procurement of this size, for procurement in this locality, and for procurement with the population demographics for the services?
Thank you, Adam. I am conscious of time, but if you will indulge me as chair to ask a question myself, because it just leads on from what you said. I'm presuming within this process, there was a quality and health impact assessment done. And my question is, were they finalised or formally signed off before the procurement process began?
So it is my understanding, to be confirmed, that they were signed up at the specification level to therefore say it is correct. But that's one of the key questions I've asked for in terms of the process to make sure it was done in the right order in terms of good practice.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, which is, would you be willing, NHS Sussex, to publish or provide publicly the full chronology of the procurement, including all pauses, clarifications, better communications, and decisions with dates at some point, maybe post-review, so the public can follow the procedural timeline of this process?
Yes, as part of the review, I've asked for a full chronology. That will be part of the appendix of the overall report. And as I said earlier, the only areas that will not be able to be included is anything that is deemed to be publicly commercially sensitive. But I would expect that we'll be able to, at a very high level, be able to do the full timeline. There's maybe specific things we just can't say in public, but we'll review that. But the reviewers have been asked to write a very publicly available detailed report.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to continue to ask questions, but I know you may have to go. You're happy to stay, that's fine. If you need to go, please do. And I wish you
I'll stay to support the team, that's fine.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Councillor Mackie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming and speaking to us. I'm interested in, with regard to procurement and with regard to health inequalities, we know the data on that. Has any of the findings of Sir Michael Mamet been put into the criteria for procurement and for reducing health inequalities, in your view?
So first of all, at a national level, so the provider selection regime, I can't see a direct line of sight between the Marmot review and what's in those regulations, but that could be my interpretation of that. Locally, we have 2 policies. We have our commissioning policy as an organisation, and we also have a joint one with the local authority. And within those areas, we therefore have chosen to weight health inequalities. So to the earlier question that came from Councillor Evans about social value, that's why there's in this procurement, 30% was skewed towards health inequalities to therefore make that work. So I think our rationale would be that is kind of the local sort of decision that we can therefore take. But there is still quite a lot of discretion given to integrated care boards for how they weight all different areas of their procurements.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Parrott.
Given the fact that we're now in a review and you're waiting for some, to undertake that process, and given the amount of interest that there now is in the community, I'm just wondering if you would be prepared to commit to going back to community engagement with, because there clearly is now quite a lot of interest in this, and there will be a lot of engagement, and people will be very interested. So, feelings are high, and I think that I would wonder if you might commit to going back to some form of community engagement where you might actually get a lot more responses. I'd also like to offer, I'm sure that many of us, particularly local councillors, have very good links with disabled groups, with other groups that will be working in this estate, and some of us obviously are ward councillors, and that we would be probably very happy. I'm obviously speaking on everyone's behalf, so apologies, but I'm sure that we would be very happy as well to facilitate community engagement if that would be useful and helpful. And I think that a more collaborative approach there might actually increase engagement.
Thank you. I think whatever happens, we're going to have to do something, aren't we? Let's be really clear. So let's be clear. Now, really, so let's, and I kind of covered up on it. There's a number of different options we can therefore take. But before we get to what that option is, we're going to have a real open conversation with the community and all the interested parties, if that makes sense. So for us, where we've got to, once we've signed the report off and we say, here's what it is, I then think there's a bit of it will need to breathe, and then we'll have to then, meet people and say, with what this says, these are our options, this is what we're thinking, and then how do we co-design that together? So, I've heard the challenge, I'm trying to be polite. Of course, I've got many questions about what's happened with this myself, but I think the very clear view for me is, whatever we do, we've got to, the most important thing is there is a really vibrant and useful service for our community to access. That's the most important thing. Who is best placed to do that is a point of debate at the moment. Let's be frank about that. So I've tried to get it into a structured process that's independent, that can then be publicly available for all of us. But I do like the suggestion of then co-designing whatever we do, how we do it together is really quite important now. So thank you for the question and the help.
Feel free to come and ask me if you need some help with getting into disability groups.
I was just going to ask a simple question. The author or the lead of this review, would it be appropriate to ask the lead of the review to come and answer questions in this committee rather than go back and ask you to do that? Because it would probably provide a bit more assurance that they're getting it from the horse's mouth. The good and the bad. So there may be some, we should be prepared for some feedback that is not so glowing, and there's been a lot of political interest in this, so we shouldn't discount, how that may have swayed people's opinion or woken people up that this is going on beyond the 56 who responded. So maybe it's the chair to decide.
Let me come in, Jeffrey, and maybe Adam would like to reply as well. From my perspective, currently as chair of the host committee, it's our role to scrutinise, and we'll await the outcome of the review. And I'm sure there'll be lots more questions to ask after that. And Adam's confirmed that he's happy to come back after the review, and at that time we'll consider whether we invite other people along that may give benefit to the host committee in scrutinising that review.
But recognising the tenor of today's debate and discussion, I think it would be wise for me to say, I think we would bring along the reviewer with us. Remember, it is our report because we've commissioned it. And the other bit you may want to consider, because of course, because I'm asking questions about did we get something right, I am overseen by NHS England. So I've also asked them to take a view of what it says too, because if there's things that we've got wrong, we should be appropriately held to account for that going forward. So I would suggest that it might be a triangle of myself, NHS England and the reviewer for you to ask the relevant questions for that. Would be probably, I think, a healthy way of doing it. And also then you then don't have a situation where you've got, I need to go back and speak to the other person. We're all in the room together. But we can co-design that near the time.
Thank you. Yes. Councillor Evans.
Sorry, I keep chipping in, don't I? But you've said several times versions of if we've done anything wrong and we'll apologise and all that. And I get that you've commissioned this report and that the existing report that we're scrutinising today, the NHS panel report, although independent, only considered very very small number of questions that were put by one provider. So I get that, I get all of that, and that there will be much more to come when your report is done and everything. But because we keep saying if we've done anything wrong, and it's like, well, that independent report, limited though it is, did find 4 serious, what they described as serious breaches of the procurement rules. That's quite a serious thing, isn't it? That's not nothing. That's why we're all here. You know, 4 serious breaches, and 3 of those 4, I think, concerned lack of transparency and fairness. Yeah. And that was specified as lack of transparency and unfairness towards the current provider specifically. And that's quite serious in itself. So I hope that your report will be looking at all of that in great detail as well.
So my job is to remain balanced and impartial at this current point. And the reason for that is the process by which the IRP occurred was that a provider made some claims about what's happened. The panel are able to give their view of that. The legal basis of where that panel sits, though, we could have chosen, which I would never have done, to have a kind of not followed the recommendation. Now that would be wrong, I think, because someone has said something that you need to consider and get right. Of course, you can imagine, though, within the organisation, I've got many views of this. I've got many views from the other providers who've bid for this service, and therefore, whilst I recognise the local tenor is quite loud on this, my job is to see it objectively, and that's what I'm saying. So I've never been involved in a review where there's nothing to learn. Let's be really clear on that. What I just need to work out is how much is there to learn in this process going forward, and what are the fundamental flaws, if any, that we've taken forward. Hence why it needs to be looked at. But yes, of course, if there is a different view taken by the reviewer than what the IRP have said, that creates a problem, doesn't it? So I have to also look at what that therefore means as well. So that's why it's quite complex. And if I'm using the language and you're at all thinking that I'm thinking we've got everything right, that just is, I think, probably impossible in this process, because look at the discussion about engagement we've had, right? So I think, but what I need to work out is, once the review is done, of it, what is material to a legal process or not, and then I need to take a view of it. That is separate to, and then what does the community think? How do we engage with them? So I get all that, but at this current point, I have to kind of go into this going, I will respond to whatever the review says, and I think it's important that we just keep an open mind until such point we're clear what it therefore says.
Do I have any other indications? I have Councillor De Oliveira.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, me again. I think it states procedure correction required, and pick on what Councillor Evans said, like if you could elaborate, because for a lot of residents, they don't know what that means. They would like clarification that you have here. So procedure correction require, what that means, what can they expect, why is that?
So we are a public sector organisation that have a set of legal duties to execute. My discussion with many of the community across whole Sussex, but particularly Brighton and Hove, has been people like things to feel transparent and fair. The IRP doesn't indicate that's been the case so far. So there's a level of a lack of confidence, I would suggest, by certain members of the community. As a result, it's our job to therefore respond to that quite clearly. When for the community, we want to make sure that we're really open and transparent. The report will be detailed because it has to look at very technical things in quite a lot of detail. But what I'll commit to do is ensure that there is a very clear, tracked, easy to understand version of what that therefore means and why we've made the decision that we've taken. But also what I'm very happy to commit to is, before we make a decision, is speak with you again about our next steps and how we're going to approach it. That's probably all I can say in public at the moment.
Thank you. Do I have any further indications from members who wish to ask a question? Councillor.
If you have any comments to make. I'm just wondering if you had anything to say about Polly Toynbee's article in The Guardian as well, if you wanted to comment on that. Obviously, that's how a lot of people have come across this nationally as well.
Everybody's entitled to an opinion on this one. That's kind of been the reality of life. You know, I don't always enjoy these national things that happen to us, but they do, because we're a health system and we should be held to account. So it's a view. The review may well say that is correct. Until I'm clear, we have to therefore kind of work with that. But everyone, as those that know me well, everyone's entitled to an opinion on this one because that is part of working with our local community. But at the current point, until I've got the answer, I think it's probably best I don't respond to that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. That's quite right. If there was one answer we expected to do, that was probably it. Right, I'm going to draw things to a close. I'm so grateful that we haven't had to go into part 2 because this is a public scrutiny committee. We might keep as much of it in the public domain as possible. I thank you, Adam, for committing to coming back to us at some point in the future after the review. And that is very much appreciated by this committee, I'm sure. I now ask all members if they're happy to note the report. The report has been noted. I'll now bring the meeting to a close, and I thank Amy, Lola and Adam for coming today, and I wish you well upon the rest of your day. Thank you for coming, and I close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.